Hello, everyone. Sorry about the delay. We were just waiting to see if one person is going to join. They haven't joined yet, but I decided to just start things up, and whenever they get here, if they end up coming, we can just loop them into the discussion. Um, Let me make all of our presenters co-hosts real quick, just so they're a bit visually distinct for me in the participants list. And then I will wrong person. Um, there we go. Um, so we're going to be having our big event of the conference here, which is a roundtable discussion on a key issue in Stirner scholarship. The issue we are going to be focusing on is basically how Stirner relates to history and the dialectic in his work. It's about his Hegelian influence and young Hegelian influence and the extent to which he remains within that sphere or breaks from it. So first I'm going to introduce all of our participants. Then I'm going to read the prompt that I sent them beforehand in full. Then I'm going to give everyone participating a chance to respond individually to the prompt. And then we're going to open it up to discussion amongst ourselves for about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how long the discussion takes. And then after that, for the remainder of the time, we're going to field audience questions and integrate those questions into the discussion. So the same rules around microphone usage apply now as they did in the previous panels too. So firstly, I will go ahead and introduce Adam Jones. Adam Jones is a doctoral researcher at the Center for Research in Modern European Philosophy at Kingston University, where he works on the relationship between Hegel and Stirner. He also co-hosts the podcast Acid Horizon, with whom he wrote Anti-Oculus, A Philosophy of Escape for Repeater Books. Our next participant is David McCullough, who is currently an MA student at Loyola Marymount University. His research interests include contemporary French philosophy, social and political philosophy, and philosophy of life. And then our third participant is Dr. Jorn Jansen, who got his PhD from the University of London Goldsmiths and has an interest in political philosophy and its implications for contemporary society. He has recently published his first book, Max Stirner and the Political Theology of Fanaticism, which delves into the political theology of fanaticism. Currently, Jansen continues to pursue his research interests in conspiracy theories. And then also I will be kind of playing a little bit of a dual role as kind of broadly a moderator, but I'll also be participating. So I guess to introduce myself, I'm Cal Nelson. I'm the founder and organizer of this symposium. I'm currently a master's student in philosophy at Duquesne University. And my interests lie in 20th century French philosophy, Max Stirner, of course, disability theory, specifically dealing with ADHD, and how everyone is wrong about it. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and then read the prompt now, and then I'll have all of our participants a chance to respond to it. So the title is Stirner, History and Dialectic. The first half of Der Einzige und sein Eigentum has presented the greatest obstacle to developing a consensus on the meaning of Max Stirner's work. His account of the progression of power and domination in, quote, Western history has historically provided a resolution to the question of how we ought to situate Stirner in relation to his contemporaries. Is he properly understood as the culmination of and as the final contributor to Hegelianism, or is he the first to fully turn his back on Hegel and the dialectic? The problem is that this resolution has proven to be multiple, with different scholars arguing in favor of both perspectives and occasionally in favor of other divergent perspectives. Lawrence Stepelevich argued that Stirner is the rightful inheritor of the Hegelian tradition. John Welsh has argued in favor of a, quote, dialectical egoism present in Stirner's work. In contrast, Andrew Koch and Saul Newman respectively identified and elaborated upon several tendencies present in Stirner's work that could more accurately situate him as the first poststructuralist rather than the last Hegelian. Finally, recently, Jeff Spiessens, I think that's how you say it, argued that Stirner strategically employs the arguments of his contemporaries in order to subvert and depart from them, rather than to situate his own views as their continuation. In short, or in sum, we know that the key to understanding Stirner's relationship to his contemporaries lies in this historical progression, but it unfortunately appears that such a fact fails to clarify what the relationship itself is. How ought we read the historical progression Stirner lays out in the first half of The Unique in Its Property? Is he displaying a commitment to a Hegelian style dialectic? Is he articulating his own dialectic? Or is it an elaborate parody of Hegelian and young Hegelian attitudes towards history and anthropology? If it is a parody, what should we take seriously and what should we take as the niche polemical squabbling of the 1840s? Is there room in his work for a dialectic with the force of necessity behind it? Is history the product of the purely random contingency of the unique? Or is there an underlying logic to it? Is there room for a dialectic that applies exclusively to the domain of property? All of these questions and more will be discussed. So why don't we go ahead and start with Adam Jones for our responses?
Yes, thank you. So this question, I mean, the stakes of this. I'll try and sum up the stakes of this question. This is a question with huge stakes in that how should we all go home? Because if there are strong ontological commitments around, for example, the questions of man and the anthropological questions, particularly the questions of race, as we know in the infamous paragraph in the opening of the section, the hierarchy, which Stirner sort of culminates his retelling of the histories of the ancients and the moderns, then Stirner's project has abjectly failed. Stirner is meant to be breaking from humanism, and ultimately, if the Einzige is only possible as the result, as a product, rather than as something that comes after a dialectic, rather than something that grounds the dialectic, which it constantly ignores in favor of its own idealizations, then that's it, pretty much, because that means the Einzige is only possible under the conditions achieved by the narrative, the dialectic of the Hegelian history. That is, the Einzige is a white German. And they do not escape that because their precondition is that history developing the production of the kind of white Germanness that can, one, produce Hegelianism by its own logic and produce Max Stirner. And so the question of how to read this is incredibly central to whether or not Stirner studies is worth its own salt in terms of any sort of emancipatory or insurrectionary project. Now, that's quite bombastic to start with, I know, but I think that's honestly the stakes because he wants to reject humanism. And if there's an ontological claim about race here, then these claims are, of course, contrary to any anti-anthropological discourse in Stirner's thought. I mean, the history of publication regarding this is quite interesting, particularly in regards to. I'm not just going to make this all about Stirner on race, but I think it's an interesting linchpin to hang this on. So most Anglophone scholars don't tend to pick up on this at all. David Leopold thinks, although he does think this is an ontological commitment to a kind of racialization. Cedric Robertson actually is on the other side of this in his book Terms of Order. He thinks that for Stirner, everyone is so unique that they're each is a quote a race unto themselves, and therefore the categorization doesn't work. And how we resolve these disputes has to be on this question of, I think, of whether or not the Einzige is white, basically. We don't have to simply pass around whether Max Stirner, in his heart of hearts, held racist views. He probably did. He was a German in the 19th century. What's proper here for his thought, and that thought is if that sort of carries along with it. Similar to when we say was Kant a racist? Of course he was. Does it matter? But is Kantianism necessarily a technology that produces a racialization? And this question of hermeneutics has been hasn't really been debated. The debate really shows up with the preface to the new edition by Wolfie Landstreicher, who contributes very little of any worth to this because he wants to have his cake and eat it. He wants to say it's a parody, but there's a truth to it. And when he says that this is parodic, you can just discount all of this. He's taking the piss out of the young Hegelians. He then says that same history also gives us grounds to articulate the truths that he sees in, for example, Taoism. You can't have your cake and eat it. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking about the narrative structures of parody themselves. I went back to Mikhail Bakhtin's text on what's called I think it's Dostoevsky's style, and he talks about the idea of parody. So his idea of a parody is the idea that you you make like a festival king, you give something a crown, then you take it away, showing that it never had the crown in the first place. That isn't the structure of Stirner's history. Stirner's history is to give this narration, which you can see if you look at the Hegel lectures that he attended, the philosophy of history lectures, uh, maps pretty much straight onto that. That and the philosophy of spirit lectures map straight onto that. And at the end of it, he says, the egoist is the ultimate product of this. Uh, Now, the question is, does this mean that the egoist is a product in the sense of it's a dialectical product, or rather it's the remainder which that history can't get rid of? In that case, it precedes it, and therefore the history is not something that you necessarily need. Then, in that case, why does he say it? This is because this is a book of Parb arguments. This is a book entirely overdetermined by the fact it's addressed to a very small group of people in a very small literary scene, in a very small back room, a very small wine bar in Berlin in the 1830s to the 1840s. So 1842 to 1845 is when this book is really coming into its own. I mean, Stirner, of course, himself writes about the young Hegelians. He writes an article called Die Freien in 1842, and he's all for the young Hegelian idea of what he calls the autonomy of the spirit. He meets them in 1843. The only mention of the autonomy in Einzige, sein, Eigentum is when he's mocking the idea of the autonomy of the spirit. And you can see, and so I think one of the best things about Jeff's book is that you see a breakage there. I mean, my work the past couple of years has been essentially it started off as trying to prove Larry's thesis, basically. You end up doing the opposite because you can see that the more Stern gets close to them on a personal level, the less he gets close on an ideological level. I mean, this is why I think there's something of a self. I think my answer to the question is, does this have a commitment in terms of the historical ontology or historization of ontology in Stirner? It would have to be no, because he rejects all of this in part two. The unique is not presented. The Einzige is not presented as a product here. It's presented as the thing which philosophers can't analyze, and I think it doesn't excuse the way things he says, but nonetheless it shows. But that's not the point. We don't need to excuse anyone. It's a matter of what claims are filtered through this. And my argument would be that the rejection of any anthropological basis for the unique is something that develops, but sets it aside from its history. And so we could say, yes, there is a racialization in the first part, and it's a very young Hegelian racism, because young Hegelian was not an anti-racist movement. It produced some of the most famous anti-Semites of our era, Bruno Bauer, for naming one. Nonetheless, racism it's so Hegelian it hurts in the first part. It's basically because what it does is it projects racializations onto racialized people themselves and then says, we are higher people, we Germans, and therefore we don't think in such essentializing categories. I mean, he says at one point that this kind of racial essential thinking is Mongolian, it's not German. I mean, it's absurd. It is accurate to what Hegel says, but it is absurd to that level. And if he's using that, it's because it's because of his audience, because of his education. He's speaking them in terms they would articulate. But in terms of the question, I think it's the most dangerous in terms of an anthropological claim, in which case the entire project is refuted. The unique is meant to short circuit that. And so I think having a sensitivity to what he's drawing upon, those two sets of lectures, the philosophy of spirit lectures and the philosophy of history lectures, we can map on these various Hegelian claims, and then we can see what ones stick through part two. And if they stick through both, then Stirner be damned, he's got them. If they don't stick by part two and we see an active rejection of that, we can see where he's leading his audience on, and then when he's snatching the rug from under them. I've gone on for quite a bit, so I'll stop there. Sorry.
Good. Thank you for that response. Why don't we have Jorn go next?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think there are many ways to approach this. So I've been thinking how to approach it, and also to absorb what Adam has said. The way I've read Stirner's work and I've also talked about this to some extent yesterday, is I think he is one of the first to find certain psychological patterns and how they affect politics. And so I don't think he is much of an Hegelian in his thought, and most of the Hegelian language he uses may very well be used as a form of parody, but it's of course also the discourse that he was part of. You know, I think sometimes, at least it feels to me sometimes, that the ego in its own, he's not sure whether he's writing for a general audience, which includes us, or whether he's just writing for his very small group of drinking buddies. And of course they would know a lot of these in jokes, and you know, like calling or making fun of a Geist in the form of a Gespenst or that kind of stuff that doesn't even translate very well. So I think where history comes in for Stirner is that I think he approaches, like I said, I think he's a very one of the earlier psychologists that studies this. So he sees certain patterns within the human psyche, and they have a certain manifestation in the political / religious sphere in the form of idealism, and we keep pursuing and attempting to refine politics and religion so that it better conforms to what we want it to do, which would explain the progression that I think he sees in history, because I think for him the historical aspects of this was definitely secondary. It's also, to be fair, at least from what we know from his doctoral exams, his weakest aspect of his research. And I think that the only thing that he had to do a research for. But I think that's the main significance of history in Stirner's work, and that we eventually will, in some Hegelian sense, then progress towards an endpoint where we realize that there is this conflict between what we want from the world and what we, you know, that we cannot get it, and then we have to come to terms with the situation. And he uses this terminology of egoism and onus to describe this. Yeah, I think that's how I view history and its significance in Stirner's work. So I'll give it to David.
Yeah, David, please go next.
Yeah, I think this is quite a complicated question, just simply because of the different sections in The Unique and Its Property. His section on a human life, like right at the beginning, it seems almost inevitably to be, I'm not sure whether it's mocking or not, but this idea of like in biological terms, like ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Like, so the development of an individual recapitulates this kind of development of the species. And it's fascinating because it does, that section clearly does seem to be dialectical, and it seems to be a little bit serious. At the end of it, he says, you know, so the child is a realist because they concern themselves with things. Then later on, they're an idealist, concerning themselves with ideas. Then at maturity, then they realize that both of those have this kind of compulsive force over them. So you go from realism, idealism, egoism. But then at the end, he says, and what of the old man? He says, well, I don't know, but I'll know when I get there. So it seems to be a kind of almost autobiographical account, rather than necessarily saying, oh, this is true for all human beings. Now, I think he does exhibit a kind of dialectical egoism, but it's not Hegelian. He is turning his back on Hegel, but especially the sections, you know, continuing, like the ancient and the modern, there's not a lot in those particular sections that really would, to me, indicate this kind of parody or mocking. He does seem to seriously think that, like, the Protestant Revolution is kind of the beginning of modernity, because with Luther you get this inwardness, and the inception of self-consciousness. But I do think then starting to turn towards the where he discusses the hierarchy and then the free. That's really, I think, when you start to get into this kind of parody or like mockery territory. In a sense, it's serious, especially when he's talking about the free. Like this is an active disagreement, and he's is seriously mocking his contemporaries. But I do see it ultimately after that first half of Der Einzige, he is trying to subvert the dialectic. So my question is complicated because it depends on which section, but overall, it's a bit like Wittgenstein in the ladder, right? As soon as you climb up the ladder, you throw it away because you realize, oh, all of this is nonsense. So it's whether it's explicit parody or not, it depends which section we're talking about. But is it dialectical? Well, yes. I mean, if you just look at the structure of the book, it is presented in the style of a dialectic. But is it ultimately dialectic in the sense of, oh, it's going to be, again, this kind of reconciliation, completion, sublation? I have a hard time accepting that view, even though he does seem to say like, egoism does come at the end, right? But that doesn't mean it's this, harmonious kind of closed system that you would get in history, in Hegel at the end of history.
Good, thank you. And then I guess I'll take my chance at this last spot to respond to the prompt. My view is that ultimately, see, it's quite complicated, and I agree with David that it depends a lot on the particular section you're dealing with, because especially when we frame it in terms of the child psychology at the very beginning. I think that there's clearly a dialectic he's trying to point out there. I don't know if he would say he's like bound by it in any sense. Like, I don't know if that's serious, but I think it's instrumental for the thing he's trying to do, which is laying out the dynamics of continuity that takes place within the idealist section. He talks about like the ancients and everything with the pre-Socratics, then Plato and Socrates, as the way to shift into the idealism. And I think that there are like some just factual things that are like wrong about that he says about like Plato and stuff. I think he's I think the true world stuff is present enough in Plato that we could say he's an idealist in that sense. It's not just I think that might just be his Hegelian influence to want to pin that to the introduction of Christianity specifically. But I think that's in some sense garnish. It's just kind of to put him more into the Hegelian conversation so he can talk about the part that's really interesting to him, which is the kind of the progression, but also like not really a real progression that takes place within the idealist section, which is modernity, all the way up till when he is talking. Because I think the really interesting thing that I realized when I was working on a chapter for an edited collection, when I was writing on Stirner and ADHD, where one of the weird things about like his like dialectic going through like from Protestantism on through liberalism is there's never actually a change in what's happening. It's the very same mechanism taking place in every single progression. It's just being applied in a different or new space or something. So I think the shift from Catholicism to Protestantism is really demonstrative of this, where now the new space is the psychical space, but it's the same system or logic of domination that's taking place there. So there isn't actually like a thing that's changing. It's like a thing that's expanding, which is really weird to try to say like, there's a dialectic there, especially when that word with his, historical content is tinged with the Hegelian meaning of it, with conflict and reconciliation and such. There's really no conflict that's really like resolving in any of these things. It's really just like one power progressing more expansively over another. And I think, and when you view it as basically just kind of this slow encroachment of dominating power over the unique, it also makes it very clear what it is what the unique is doing at the very end of it, where now suddenly humanism collapses and we can start talking about like kind of the unique as it emerges out of the rubble. I think it's like it's very clear that what he's saying there is not that the unique is somehow a product of that, it's something that's been present throughout the entire time, that's been kind of suffering a lot of violence against it, and now it has just managed to come out on top through the collapse of this logic of domination that just can't support itself. It ultimately turns against itself, and that's one of the reasons why I think like I've pushed back in I think last year at my presentation on the views of the unique as this like negative thing, where I think we can only view it as that when we're viewing it from the perspective of the discourse it's trying to subvert. When we're kind of inside that system itself, we view this thing outside of it as a negative element within it. It's that kind of characteristic move of discursive capture. And I think that leaves out the whole rest of the book and, all the other work that he's done. The second half, I think one of the great things about Jeff's book that pointed out to me about some of the young Hegelian context that I wasn't aware of was that the kind of divide, like right down the middle of the book, is a classic young Hegelian thing where it's dividing between the old and the new. I think we have to like really strongly read him in terms of that shift. And because just to wrap it back to the thing I originally brought this up for, because there is this kind of collapse of the logic of domination at the end of the first half of the book, and the unique kind of emerges out of it, we can read back to the child psychology where it looks like a clean dialectical progression going on and say, okay, actually it isn't really a dialectical progression, because ultimately, even if the first shift was, the second one fails. And this is, I guess, why we can't read it in the Marxist way of, egoism is the negative unity of realism and idealism. So I'll leave my response at that, and we can go ahead and open it up to the discussion amongst ourselves. So does anyone want to start off with that? Yeah, Adam, go for it.
Yeah, actually, let's give some additional context, particularly on the man's life section, because it is a repetition of the categories that Hegel gives in his psychology section of the anthropology section of the lectures on the philosophy of the spirit, which, for all we know, Stirner attended. And this is, of course, assuming Stirner was a very good student, which, based on various reports, again, he, as John's saying, wavers at various times. But what I think was interesting is where he came to sit, because the man, because for one, there's a few repetitions. One, the child breaks or negates sensuous objects. Hegel famously said the most rational thing a child can do with their toys is break them, by then saying that this immediate sensuousness of them is nothing, and only the reason behind them is good. And of course, Stirner does this, and what's the child find behind? The reason behind the rod, the caning stick, they find the essence of discipline, and they think, I've transcended the immediate, and I've now found this thing which is mine because I've discovered my mind through it, and they become fanatical. The thing is, the thing where he breaks with Hegel actually is on the consideration of the man. So, and this actually ties into both the racial, historical, and the psychological stuff, because man achieves a kind of a mediation of their own particular, for Hegel, particularity mediates its personal self-interest through the universal, and man, the maturity is when you cultivate what he calls a second nature, where you build a set of habits that align your personal interests with the interests of the universal, such that, and this is the whole thing of Hegel's objective spirit, through private interests and through the accepting that there could be institutions that mediate them for us, we generate the entire sphere of society where private and universal, universal in particular, are united. This is what Stirner's putting back on. because Stirner is saying, well, no, what this habituation is actually just the further internalization of domination, where I become so subjected to it that it becomes second nature. And this is actually similar because when he does when he talks about old men, he talks about them when he talks about the Far East. He says, this is a country. He says it's a place of habit where you can't they become ossified. He says, subjects vegetate in subjection. I can't remember the vegetate, but it's like unter, because his verb for subject is not subject, but German untertaner, the one who serves under, the one who does things under the command of someone else. And so I think in terms of the psychology, I mean, you get the psychology of possession fully from this, and his breaking with Hegel on that is precisely why I think that's where there's something you should say is a claim. In the ancients, and it's all Hegel. It's just ripped straight up. It's basically him saying this because at the same time you have to remember that Feuerbach and Weill, they saw themselves as the completers of this. They saw themselves within this narrative, and so he's going to sort of say that this narrative is true and say you still haven't got me. In the sense of, indeed, I think it's true that there is a. I mean, if we're going to talk about dialectic here, I think the real source of the dialectic, because as you said, it just repeats the same thing, because what is motivating the dialectic is not precisely what Hegel wants to say, is that the dialectic is motivated by itself. For Stirner, and we see this most clearly in the dialectic of the free liberalisms, rational political liberalism, social liberalism, humane liberalism. The problem is that each of them try to overcome a particularity in the social sphere, by which I mean the rational political liberals, the bourgeois, want to get rid of the arbitrary rule of the king and the estates. That fails because the egoism of property, of legal personages is still there. So then the socialists come in and they want to get rid of the egoism of the bourgeois, the particularity of them, and so that fails. And so the humane and critical liberals say that, the socialists are too much tied to the individual welfare of the worker, which is too particularist, be thinking about the whole species. And Stirner says, well, the species is no one. The egoism is still there because each human is still a particular human being. And so if there's a dialectic there, if we want to stay dialectical in our reading of Stirner, big Marxist pipe smoke coming out me when I say that, it's because you have to be kind of Adornian, because only in the sense that egoism is a product, or at least it's both the product and the precondition of the fact that the universality of the concept of man, society, the bourgeois, the person, always overshoots any particular person or worker or whatever. And the person always exceeds that concept by being more than that essence. And therefore, if there's a dialectic, it has to be a negative one, because there's no positive reconciliation there. It's got to be a kind of proto-negative dialectics. And I think this is what Stirner says when he says in the philosophical reactionaries that I can dissolve dialectically with positive dialectically, and not because the dialectic has this hidden secret Stirner power in it that Hegel, somehow didn't recognize or cipher. It's because there's something outside of it. And I think this is where, I mean, as David in the last talk mentioned Schelling, there is kind of a dark ground to this, and this is I guess why the question of whether Stirner was the last Hegelian, the first post-structuralist, arises in a sense, because there's a very similar person who has this relationship to Hegel and post-structuralism, who is very similar to Stirner, and that is George Bataille. But what he does is he presupposes that Hegel is right, in order to say that knowledge is complete, we have non-knowledge, and this is where you're beyond this. Whereas what Stirner's doing is saying, of course, Bataille, huge influence on everyone from Derrida, Deleuze, Foucault. But what Stirner's doing is saying, like, you've missed something from the outset. There's something at the beginning of your activity. And it ends up being less of a linear development, and also becomes a critique of kind of method, really. And I think that's where, if we're going to look for dialectic, it's got to be, we're going to have to go later German if we want to find the parallels to it, because I mean Jeff's book is fantastic. It's very historical. I mean my work's both been trying to do that conceptually. I mean in terms of Hegelian dialectics, he says that you don't get that far in the system with Stirner. By the time you get to when he says that property is not a thing, an external thing, but it's power. The sphere of objective right upon which Hegelian dialectics develops into the third part of the encyclopedia, gone. That's it. It doesn't. You don't need to presuppose it. He just hasn't agreed to its discourse.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jorn, go for it.
Well, I've been there's I think a very basic question I'd like to ask to all of you, which is that I think, Cal, you suggested that there's this dichotomy of either it's a parody or he's the completion of Hegelianism. But I've also been wondering to what extent is it not just the discourse or the vernacular of his time and his environment? Because one problem that we have with researching Stirner is that we have one book and a few extra writings, and there's some very interesting stuff in there, but we have almost nothing else to go by, and almost no one had the opportunity to ask him about it. So we have to. So it's hard to weigh how important certain sections are in comparison to others. If you would take just one book from any other philosopher and you try to do the same thing, it's very difficult to know what concerns them more, or what concerns them less. Because I think there's also a section in The Ego and Its Own about where he laments that dueling is prohibited, and no one really ever brings this up because we don't think that it's particularly relevant to his thought. And because when it comes to this dialectic, there's also a question of how much does it matter. And I had the similar discussion yesterday with Tim, like how much does this union of egoists matter? Is it just there because he is in an environment where his interlocutors are very concerned with these subjects, and he wants to say something about it, but he doesn't really care all that much. So I'm very curious what you guys think of this.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that like a lot of the things that are like that we're identifying as kind of problematic for him are largely due to like kind of environmental contingency in some sense, because I think if we took them to be like really strongly binding and necessary to his thought, we would be, I think, trying to like kind of incorporate the excess of the unique into its own relations with its property in some way. I think this was kind of getting into what I was going to respond to what Adam said about, which is that like, on this kind of like negative dialectical point, it's really a question about like how can we talk about the relations between like excess and that which it's exceeding, and it's like it's difficult to even kind of, I think, use the language of like a dialectic, because there's still like some way in which like it's encompassing the whole dynamic taking place. And I think it maybe just makes more sense to talk about like a kind of dynamic, just being very general, because otherwise we I think risk a kind of like discursive capture by bringing it really strongly into contact with that which it's trying to escape from.
Yeah, I mean, also on this issue of like weighing, I mean, this is really just also like the difficulty you're mentioning, like the idea of, oh, well, we can just figure out what Stirner really thought. I mean, that's inevitably it's going to be impossible. So I almost, I mean, we can interpret it better or worse, like given historical context. But I do wonder to what extent too, if rather than like, what does he really think, the question should instead just be like, and I mentioned this during my talk, it's just how do we use it? And I do think just from the content of the book itself, I mean, it seems to be use it how you please, right? It doesn't actually concern Stirner. He's it's your affair, right? It's not mine. Now it does seem to like, I almost wonder to what degree, because when you're reading it, it's all, at the beginning, it's so very Hegelian and young Hegelian, like to what degree he was almost doing this as a kind of a sleight of hand to get his, his readers at that time to think, to kind of lull them into the sense of security of like, oh, this is just going to be another kind of young Hegelian work. And then boom, you get that section on the free where he explicitly goes against everything they're saying. So it's kind of like you sweep the rug out from under them. I think that's one potential way of reading it. But then, these different particular passages, I'm not sure how to answer the question of like relative importance to him. But I think we could always ask ourselves like, the relative importance to us.
Yeah, I think what you say I think it's very true, and I've been thinking about this as well. And it's also the way generally I like to read philosophers is what can we get from them, what can we learn from them? Because none of them are perfect, and we should take the good things and leave out the bad things, and then try to figure out the world and how things hang together. It's just the one thing with, or one issue with this, and I presume one reason why there's such an interest in what Stirner really thought is because clearly the reason why we take interest in his work is because there's something intelligent in it. Otherwise he's just a guy who wrote a book otherwise, but we think that there's something in there. We want to know what it is. So to an extent, we have to ask also, what does he mean by things? Even if he's wrong, and he probably is in many things, but that's an issue, and this also is one of the reasons why I think it's the discourse, at least in this discussion of Hegelianism, is also very important. And also, I'm very interested in what Adam has to say on this, because clearly he is more of an expert on this field than I am, because I like to read Stirner as a proto-psychologist and more of a scientist. But this is also a thing, what makes at least the question that Adam brought up about about race and that discussion, what makes it interesting, because it is true that, his contemporaries also wrote about this, but there's also here a certain, it is also the discourse of the time. And I'm not an expert on 19th century German philosophy, but I've read a reasonable amount of it, and they have a tendency to use race for many subjects that we don't, like culture. For example, I think Nietzsche criticizes the Dutch race in comparison to the German race, where he clearly means culture, but he doesn't write it as such. And if you read it through the modern lens, it sounds very strange. What would be the difference between the Dutch and the German in that sense, in the genetic sense? So that's why I wanted. It's one. These are really two questions that I have. I'm a philosopher. I ask questions. Answering them is much harder. But these are questions I have for you guys.
Well, the relation of Hegelianism. What's interesting about Hegelianism in this sense is, the dialectics of, the discourses of Hegelianism he's responding to. So mostly Bauer and Feuerbach. So Feuerbach and Bauer are both ultimately Christian supremacists, in the sense that they think Christianity is the most developed religion, and that expresses the essence of man. They think, because for essentially Hegelian reasons, that but also that as the expression of the God-man, they bring God and man closer together. And should I give a history? I could just give a history of young Hegelianism, if people. So David Strauss writes this book, The Life of Jesus, saying that Jesus basically didn't exist, was not a miraculous person. Bruno Bauer, who's edited the second edition of Hegel's Lectures on Religion, really rising star amongst the group called what we now know as the right Hegelians, or the old Hegelians, and their whole thing was what Stepelevich calls accommodationism, showing that against the king of Germany at the time, who thought Hegel had implanted Germany with the quote-unquote dragon seed of Hegelian pantheism, was actually fully someone who could be accommodated and explain the rationality and justifiability to exist of the German state. Bauer was sent to refute Strauss by saying that actually the gospel narrative was logically necessary, and it unfolded but due according to a dialectic which Hegel pointed out, therefore meaning Hegel justifies the Bible, therefore Hegel justifies you, therefore please don't sack us. What did Bauer do? He proved it, and then accidentally proved that the dialectic of human self-consciousness justified the biblical narrative. But in doing so, that meant that the truth of the Bible narrative was in the dialectic of self-consciousness, not in the Bible itself. Divine revelation was supplanted by Hegelian dialectic, and he suddenly realized, oh, self-consciousness is the real thing. And he became an atheist. He gets fired, and so many other doctors this time get fired, forming the Doctors Club, which Marx famously joined. Then they end up in Berlin, duking it out with each other, yelling about what ways we should do this new revolution against the Christian state. Now that we know that there's a kind of revolutionary atheism in the air. Rouge famously calls Bauer the Robespierre of theology, and as Spiessens points out in his book, these guys are just basically a Maoist cult. They're just yelling at each other all the time, trying to get everyone to do self-criticism of each other, saying, who's the more Christian, who's still got unattached Christianity, who is still alienated from the radical negative essence of self-consciousness. I mean, this all comes up in a book that Bauer writes called The Trumpet of the Last Judgment Against Hegel, the Atheist and Antichrist, when he says that Hegel was a Jacobin. And in this book, actually, Bauer even brings up the unique one who is purged through the flames of criticism and arises from Christianity, ready to basically take on the world and, destroy the Christian state. And Stirner's in this milieu after being very fascinated with it, and he shows up and he realizes these guys are just doing Christianity again. And that sort of discourse he's doing. This is why he writes the book. I believe it's either Edgar Bauer, Bruno's brother, or Engels who recounted that Stirner would point to his desk and say, here's my great text I'm going to bring out and sort of, spite you all. And all of these people are writing in the same journals. They were writing in, for example, I think the Allgemeine Zeitung and the Neue Reich Zeitung, Rheinische Zeitung, sorry, not Reich, Rheinische Zeitung. And they were all sort of essentially a collection of Discord servers, basically. No one else was reading this apart from them. And so this is the context in which Stirner's book came out. A lot of pub arguments. Otto Wigand, who was the official publisher for these guys, put this out. Copies of the book, they're dated 1845, but they come out in 1844, partially to escape the censors, partially because he wanted all the young Hegelians to read it before everyone else did, because those were his real targets. And so the discourse of internecine beef between writers with far too much spare time and, apart from Stirner, famously far too much money, ends up over-determining this. And so the history of this book, it's both in a way sort of, it takes it away from the grandiosity of the narrative that we think about, because we typically approach Stirner, at least in my experience, we approach him from the Hegelian lens. We approach him as the unexplored, the undiscovered country, the unexplored consummate Hegelianism that can say, like, Hegel's actually got radicalism. Do you know why? Because he makes Stirner who he is. Or if you approach it from the other way, you approach it through, if you like Stirner, check out this guy. And there's these offerings of radicalism in a very underexplored and underrated, I guess, philosophical character. And I think that, of course, overdetermines so much of what we bring when we approach him. And so that's part of the challenge in a way, is that matching the narrative of Stirner's own reason for writing the book, the narrative of his own life, which of course we have through John Henry Mackay, who writes an incredibly forwarding hagiography, which is not the most accurate, versus the narratives that we bring to the table when we read Stirner, our own personal histories, why we read him. Because it's rare that anyone reads him. Why would, we're not very rare. I mean, I didn't approach Stirner when I read him first time because I wanted to understand the history of historical materialism, or, German debates over biblical criticism in the 1840s. I think that's part of the question, is what histories are we bringing to Stirner as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's really helpful context. And I think that, like, that is kind of, the key question, because I feel like there's a lot of the debates around this question are really debates about like, what is it that we can use Stirner for, you know? Some people want to use him historically or to situate him in relationship to just Marx or Hegel or something, where others want to try to employ him more like kind of for either like stronger philosophical or political ends through like French theory later on or through other avenues. Some want to just use him in kind of the anarchist tradition as this kind of like critic. There's a lot of different like people competing over the legacy of Stirner, you know, and that's where a lot of I think these interpretive issues seem to come down, you know. I wanted to try to like kind of recapitulate what it seems like we've developed kind of a consensus around, just so we can see where it is we kind of need to go from here, or if we want to start to open it up to audience questions or something. So it seems like we are kind of all in agreement that whatever the kind of dynamic that Stirner is laying out in this first part of the book, it is not a Hegelian dialectic, you know. It is not one in which there is conflict and resolution in a progressive sense. That seems to be pretty clear from everyone. I think some of the discourse we've been having is about what the kind of the status of the details in this picture, you know. I think we all agree that it is not like 100% things that we should take seriously, you know. There is some chaff in there that we should be cutting out. The question seems to be like, to what degree is it chaff? What parts of it seem to be extraneous or just historically contingent squabbling, you know? But it seems to be that there is more consensus that like as you get later on in the first part, especially when he starts talking about liberalism, he does mean it in a pretty strong sense. Like especially because that's like the stuff he knew the most about, because he was living in that time debating these people that had all of these different views. That seems to be probably the strongest. Does that seem to be an accurate characterization of where we're at right now? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So then we kind of have the option here of, do we want to kind of keep on debating as to like, you know, where we draw the line, or like which passages we like, you know, choose to keep or discard? Do we want to kind of try to move the topic of conversation onto another related topic that this one bears on, or do we want to open it up to like audience questions?
I'd say let's open it up to the questions.
Okay.
Yep.
I'd very much like to hear what Jacob has to say about this.
Okay. I am going to throw it to Ben first because he raised his hand earlier, but then we're going to go to Jacob. So Ben, if you're still here, feel free to speak up.
No pronouns, please. But yeah, my current work is on Deleuze and Stirner from the perspective of difference and repetition. So I just wanted to add, throw my hat in the ring. It seems to me that there is no dialectic in Stirner's unique, because dialectical logic is also representationalist. Through words, we have fixed ideas, as he says in the unique and its property. The dialectic is driven by words, I believe. It's sort of established in the beginning of the phenomenology of spirit in the sense certainty section. Words, dialectic, negativity, and positivity are modes of representationalist thinking. Representation for Deleuze means same, similar, analogous, or opposed, and this is what time is. This is what dialectic is as well. And this opposition is driven by representation. So if Stirner's unique is unspeakable, unrepresentable, unthinkable, non-being, then the dialectic would not apply to the unique.
I think I definitely agree, and I'm trying to do work in a similar direction of connecting Stirner up with like early Deleuze, you know, and it's like I think that there's a lot of like fruitful connections to be made there. I think the big point of disagreement is that like Deleuze does not want to say that there's an unthinkable difference, you know. That's his like strong anti-Platonist turn. But I definitely think I definitely think that you're right that we can read the two kind of in connection to be able to like very expressly say that Stirner is not doing a Hegelian dialectic.
And
for
in
sure.
some ways, I think that sense is a little bit like, I mean, I'm sorry, the unique, we can kind of speak about it because he says on the one hand that it's thoughts, words, and, things of this nature, but then it's also not. So we are kind of speaking about it. We are kind of producing things when we are, the unique. So I do think that Stirner is more in line with a Deleuzian perspective because it is also productive as well as non-representationalist. But I don't have much else to say. Thank you all so much for what you've presented on.
Yeah, thank you for your point. Adam, does it look like you want
Yeah.
to respond there?
Just some stuff on Deleuze and Stirner. I mean, I think Tim Fighton actually has a piece in the collection Deleuze and Anarchism on this question of Deleuze and Stirner. And I think yeah, if we want to conceptualize something beyond identity, which Stirner obviously wants us to do, either we go Adornian or exactly we go Deleuzian, to go on to a different, because there's definitely a critique of the image of thought in Stirner. If he's when he has this distinction between own criticism and servile criticism, when he's critiquing Bauer and Hegel, he's critiquing the entire. When he rejects philosophy, he's rejecting, I think, precisely the image of thought that Deleuze is so well, maybe something similar, which is why the critique of Stirner that Deleuze gives as him being him being Hegel basically is such a missed encounter. But yeah, I think.
Good. Now, does anyone else want to? Yeah, David.
Actually, I do think there is some sense of a dialectic in Deleuze, except it's not obviously going to be from negation, contradiction. It's like a differential dialectic, and I think there's points. It's I think in chapter 3, like the image of thought, where he's talking about what is the idea as a problem, and it's like he seems like, well, problems are dialectical. I remember he says this, but the problem is with the Hegelian dialectic. Again, it's just assume the particular problem under a universal solution, rather than looking at just difference. And it's also a reduction of a problem to its solution rather than the conditions under which the problem itself emerged. Now with Stirner, again, I do think there's a kind of dialectic, but not a Hegelian one. As we've said earlier, approaching Deleuze or Stirner from Deleuze, I think, as others have said, you get something quite similar. You get a critique of representation. And though I don't think the role of difference is going to play a big role in Stirner. Now, I think you can use Stirner to do that. Of course, you can use him to do a lot of different things, and hence why I think there's all the debates of, oh, Stirner is an existentialist, a nihilist, the first post-structuralist, which is anachronistic. But what they're really saying is, I want Stirner to do these things for me. I want to use Stirner to be existentialist or nihilist, post-structuralist. And in the same way, I think with Deleuze, with his critique of Hegel, I was saying, I think before we started here, really difference in repetitions just is a critique of Hegel. And it's kind of going, taking Kant where he refused to go. And I think you could read Stirner exactly the same way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I totally agree. Jacob, would love to hear what you have to say on the matter.
Yes, let me see if I'm here. Am I here?
Yep.
Yes. I'll be hey, nice to see you all. Sorry I'm late. And great discussion, great conference. I really like these papers and how people read Stirner, like with different philosophers together, with Fanon, with du Beauvoir, with analytic philosophers, kind of breaking out of the boundaries of just Hegel and Marx and Nietzsche. But I'm going to be the odd man out here. I will not stand for this Hegel bashing any longer. How dare you all? You should be ashamed of yourselves, says the father. No. So let me just say one thing. I think this discussion of the dialectic is sometimes a red herring when it comes to talking about Stirner, right? Because the talk about dialectic as if Hegel has a dialectic that's one thing is kind of a straw man that was put on Hegel later. It'd be like reducing Stirner to just spooks, like as if that's what Stirner is, a spook man. That's the same thing when I hear talk about Hegel as a Hegel dialectic. It's much more complicated than that. His thinking is much more weird, and it's become kind of a target of 20th century philosophy for good reasons, right? Because it dominated so much 19th century philosophy in different ways. We shouldn't forget that Marx, Marx criticizes Stirner for falling behind Hegel, right? For being not as radical as Hegel, for not going far enough. So we shouldn't always think that Stirner is like the more radical version of Hegel, right? There's also a critique that says Stirner falls behind Hegel, and what we really need to do is like Hegelianize all the way through, right? Not letting any ego behind. So I think we shouldn't just stick to these static pictures of these figures. We should take them seriously as dynamic, interesting thinkers. And Stirner situated within that, developing it in his own very weird way. I'm going to use another anachronistic term here. I think Stirner is doing a kind of immanent critique in the first half. And it's also a vague kind of 20th century term, immanent critique, working through the text itself, breaking it down. People also say deconstruction. But, to do an immanent critique, you take the terms of your opponent and you see, and you kind of show their gaps and their flaws, and you use them against themselves. This kind of jujitsu. I think Marx does that in Capital with the proponents of liberal capitalism. Stirner does that with the proponents of liberalism, with young Hegelians. Is it Hegelian or not? I don't know if that's even an interesting question anymore. It's like, it's just that was his world, right? He's in that world, and he's working within it, out of it, beyond it. That's like that. That's just the whole atmosphere of the environment. He's kind of breaking with it. He's going beyond it and everything. But I think what's interesting for us now is to be a bit more free with understanding Hegel, not be so dogmatic about who Hegel is and whether or not he applies him or not. And also to be more free in thinking about Stirner beyond Hegel and Marx, like it was done this weekend. So what do we learn about Bataille when we read Stirner with him? Or what are we reading about Stirner when we read Bataille with him, for instance, like Adam does? So what do we gain by looking? What do we learn about the world today by reading Stirner through it, right? I think that's, there's some methodological things we can learn, and there's some also content, right? And I think his critiques are still talking to us, not only for historical reasons. I mean, if they were, I don't know, we'd be all like philologists, right? We would just be looking at the text and trying to understand the words. But I think we have a bit more of a kind of ethical reason that speaks to us today, because, and here's my reason, I think the problems he diagnoses are still here. And because they're still here, they're still going to speak to us. And when they're not here, they will not speak to us anymore. I think that's why Marx speaks to me still. He's still talking about capitalism. We're still, when those problems go away, they will not speak to us anymore. I still find it very valuable to work through Marx's reading of Stirner, just because no one else has taken Stirner so seriously. I mean, I don't think there's been anyone in the history who's read Stirner as seriously as Marx, or seriously is the wrong word, who's been so annoyed, who's been so obsessed with Stirner, like we are, right? We're also obsessed in a certain way. So I find it valuable to work through these weird obsessions. And I'm still working through them passionately, yes. I think, we might be done with Stirner sometimes, but he's not done with us, right? So thanks for doing this, Cal, and everyone.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I think that there's a lot that we can discuss from that. Does anyone want to go first?
I mean, on the level of, we are still in Hippel's Weinstube. If you look at so many debates on the left, I think one of the problems with, me and Jake have already spoken about this before, but it's just so many debates on the German left defining who is the working class, who is the revolutionary subject, how do we talk about them, what do we do? Because all of these debates have been flattened by the hegemony of Marxist parties to it all starts with Marx, and people's sort of misreadings of Marx actually become replications of debates that they were having in Germany in the 1840s before, before the Vormers. So you look at a debate and you see, well, this person's a humanist Marxist. Oh, wait, no, not humanist Marxist. They're just Feuerbach. This person's basically a new atheist trying to do critique of ideology on the intellectual level alone. They're Bauer. Here's someone doing that slightly more anarchistly. They're Edgar Bauer. Here's someone trying to do this in a way that has like a really weird reading of human nature. They're Hess. And we see these positions insofar as the material conditions of our time haven't, in terms of their core fundamentals, haven't shifted. We can see in the intellectual cultures the same things repeating, of swapping one abstraction out for another, and this is why Stern absolutely still speaks to us, because we haven't left. And even like I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to say immanent critique is probably more accurate than dialectic in a sense. Yeah, as Jacob was saying, in the sense of what Stirner's doing in, for example, the dialectic of the free liberalisms is comparing what they want to achieve, basically comparing the standard they set for, this is our standard. We will have this society when this is real, to its actualization. That's why the political liberalism, bourgeois ideals, produces its opposite insofar as it's a society defined by the legal category of the haver produces the have-nots, and then the have-nots enact that as their own standard, the welfare of the worker, and then that produces the welfare as the universal, which is necessarily determined by particular interests, and therefore the humanists show up to say, we need to abstract this further because you produce the opposite. And then the opposite of the man is produced the unman, and the unman, of course, is the thing that was there from the very start, which was egoism. And so it is an immanent critique. It is, but I mean, that's why reenactors can say it's kind of Adornian, but at the same time, it could be a Deleuzian as well, insofar as the question that Stirner puts to us is the lingering presence of non-identity. Do you want to say non-identity is a metastability of difference, in which case, your Deleuze and your Schelling come through, or do you want to say it's something you have to work through insofar as you're never going to achieve it, and the only philosophy that can be reasonably practiced in the face of despair is from the standpoint of redemption? Either way, that's the stakes here, I think, in terms of philosophy.
Which way, Western man?
Yeah. So first of all, instead of infamous Spookman, is the correct term not Ghostbuster? Right? Is he not the first Ghostbuster? There. But so on this, well, I also alluded to this earlier, but on the question of what does Stirner mean to us, I think this is a more difficult question than it seems, because obviously, generally, we read philosophy and we take from it what is useful or what is good or what, yeah, exactly. I see. Yeah, I saw the meme. That's where it comes from. Yeah. But we read philosophy and we take from it what speaks to us, or it's certainly the reason why we're interested in it. But with Stirner, it's so difficult, because one, because we only have one book, and because it's written in such an unusual style. Even with Nietzsche, who stylistically is probably the most similar, at least we have more to go on. And it's, I think the anarchist FAQ calls it a Rorschach test. And that would obviously be a very extreme way of putting it, but is it really just, what if these were random words on paper and we all saw something in it and we were inspired and definitely helped us do things and it made us better philosophers? It's like, that would be one extreme. But the other extreme would be that there's clearly a meaning in this and we're just not getting it. Like, for example, can I say that the God delusion is a proclamation of Christian faith? That is it a book that says that Dawkins really believes in Christian? Because obviously that's not what he meant, and he makes this very clear. But what if I read this? Am I doing it wrong, or am I free to do this? This is a similar Rorschach test, and I think this is an issue that it's just, you always have this when you read philosophy, but you have this so much more with the ego in its own. Do you get what I mean? I hope you get it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this kind of like goes to the thing I mentioned earlier, where it's that like I feel like a lot of these interpretive disagreements lie in the fact that we're all just trying to use Stirner for different means, you know. And I feel like one of the reasons why I chose this topic for this roundtable is that I feel like this is kind of the common point of the text that like weighs us down in our interpretations and the various ways that we want to take him, you know. It's like in some ways it's the most rich part of the text because there's a kind of incredible depth to it, and it's incredibly detailed regardless of if it's like purely historically accurate or not, but also like and not necessarily opposed to that kind of richness and depth. It's also the thing that kind of like binds you a lot when you're trying to like go beyond just what Stirner's trying to do, you know. There's a lot you can learn from it, but there's also kind of a lot that weighs us down. And so it kind of almost raises the question of, okay, so like how is it that we should like read Stirner? Should we do should we do that in this kind of classic academic way where we care about like what he meant? Or should we do it in like a really actually Stirnerian way where it's just about like kind of using him for our own means and not giving a damn about whatever he actually thought? Because ultimately we're not really ever going to know at this point with how little we have of him, you know. Like you mentioned, like we just don't have as much text like we do with Nietzsche or something, where we can even if there, you know, there's points of debate, we could make like some claims that we could feel pretty sure about. Like, you know, like what Adam said, I think it was either earlier in this one or in the previous panel, where it's like the amount of like theses in Stirner's work is actually quite small, you know. It's like there's not a whole lot of commitments that we have to have for this, so it's really difficult in some way, but there's also a lot of like good room for creativity and kind of a lot of directions you can go with him for that reason, you know.
Yeah, but and I'm just thinking, could we be wrong? You know, like if we can't be wrong, and if we're really just reading it what we want to see, you know, what's the point of even you know, reading his work at all?
Well, I think the Stirnerian answer would be that it empowers us to do so, you know, that it lets us do things we could not do without. But I see Jacob also has his microphone unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, you know, of course you could read Stirner just as a Rorschach text, just to get what you want out of it already. But I think, do you want to learn something new as well, is the question. Do you want to kind of learn from the text, try to see what it's saying? Even if you, you know, as kind of a methodological presupposition, think that you cannot get there fully, I think there's a certain faith you need to have that there's something there and that you could try to figure it out. And maybe you could drop that away later, right? Like, but I think that helps me to read Stirner. I'm like, okay, first of all, there's something here. Second of all, it's going to be interesting. And third, like, I don't want to already guess what it's going to say. So once I try to work through it, or you work through it, we work through it, you learn something from the text, and then I guess it's your choice, right? To use it or to discard it, right? This is crap. Criticize it, or to use it and put it forward. So I think there is something definitely there, but that doesn't shackle us. You know, that could also free us to discard it or use it in certain ways. Another way to help is to read more than just the Einzige. I mean, he did write more. Like, there's a whole book of short writings in German. There's the art and religion text is very interesting. I think should be read more and discussed more. The false principle of education, his critique of, or not his critique, his review of Bruno Bauer's book, his first one. There's the Stirner's Critics, which is super interesting, and we should probably read what the critics said also. You know, what Feuerbach said, what Hess said, and then also read what Stirner said. Philosophical reactionaries, you know, it's still debatable whether it's attributed to him. Actually, people gave me shit for saying it was in my book. So I think it's pretty. If it's not him, it's someone that could be him, or it's and then there's the big text that's not translated, the history of the reaction, which is mostly quotes from others, but he has commentary in that text. and he quotes like Blanqui, and he quotes like, you know, he's got there's weird stuff in the history of reaction as well. And then there's his translation of Smith and Say, which also maybe we could read and figure out things in there. Maybe he translated them in certain ways. I think he also had introductions and comments in them. So there is actually a lot more material than we usually think there is. There's also articles that he wrote in the 1840s. For instance, he wrote some articles on nationalism in the late 1840s, which are a bit complicated and strange, and some politics as well. He wrote about. So there's a lot of material there that can still be translated and discovered. And also the history of Stirner's reception and Stirner's influence, super interesting and undiscovered. Like Tim Dowdall has done some research on it, but there's a long history of people reading Stirner that's not just McKay or Walker or Tucker or Martin. There's a lot of more interesting, weird figures in history. I'm trying to write something on Anselm Ruest and Salomo Friedlander. We're also, you know, they did the Einzige newspaper in 1919. So I think there's a lot there to learn from and to go with. Which constrains us, right? That says we cannot just be completely unshackled in our reading of Stirner, right? We have to have something to grapple with.
Yeah, I don't know if we should dwell on this subject too long, because I think there's another question, but because there's you've probably also seen that there's a book by Helms, by a certain Helms, that reads Stirner as a fascist, right? But no one else really does that, to my knowledge. Also, I mean, by the way, I want to say you're correct that there are many other writings of his. It's just that a lot of them are, I think, dwarfed by the one book that we have, and it's still fairly limited compared to other philosophers. I wanted to point. I mean, you're totally right that there are other writings, just that it's still quite limited. But yeah, I'm curious, and you know, like there is a reading of Stirner that's fascist.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Marinetti. I mean, the future Mussolini. I mean, they read Stirner too, and they were inspired by him. I think we should be. I think what's the name? Wayne Bradshaw. He writes about this in his book on Stirner, on the influence of Stirner among fascists, among nationalists. There's also a strong nationalist reading of Stirner, which is very strange, but there's a certain logic to it about the nation becoming the ego, the nation kind of becoming like the supreme power. There's like an anti-capitalist reading, of course. There's the Randian reading. I think one should learn about these things, but not take them all as equal. I think there should be a way of saying that some are more accurate than others. That would be my perspective for it.
No, I think that's a good like approach to all these divergent ways that you can take him, for sure. Ben, you had a question?
Yeah, my question sort of revolves around this, how do we interpret Stirner, and also how do we write about Stirner in a system which kind of fundamentally makes us write a certain way? So like I'm writing for graduate school right now, and we need to sort of boil everything down. We can't, you know, write in a way which we would on a blog. We have to write to an audience. We have to do all sorts of things to, like, I think, Oedipalize ourselves into a certain discourse. And so what I wonder is, if truth is something which can be a fixed idea in itself, then the hermeneutical question becomes a matter of becoming stuck and then unstuck in words which duplicate from the source material in each interpretation out of the text singularity. If we are anarchists, our duty is to know master, and truth itself can be a master. And Oedipalization, which comes with fixed ideas, becoming attached and territorialized on specific interpretations. This, you know, I think getting stuck in this mode is kind of the style of writing graduate papers. So to free interpretation from interpretive discourse, I think, is to create art, as opposed to what we're doing for the academy, which we specialize our discourse in the tiny fields of control, you know, the genres that we have to write in such and such. And in order to get rid of that, you kind of have to get rid of this, like, you know, competitive sort of discourse. And that would be fundamentally un-Deleuzian. I think it would be kind of more of an egalitarian unity perspective if you were to try to do away with the discourse. So I don't want to do away with the discourse, but just this field of control is a problem nonetheless, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's ways that I can speak to that, having recently kind of written on Stirner and specifically with like neurodivergence. Like I mentioned earlier that I wrote on my experiences with ADHD, and one of the difficulties with that is that no one writes about ADHD from the perspective of ADHD in philosophy, really. The most that you get is either Foucauldians talking about how it's a sham and it's a constructed disorder, or analytics talking about the epistemological problems with diagnosis. There's nothing really about it. So I had to kind of negotiate a way with kind of this Stirnerian influence in mind to like figure out how I can express this kind of experience that neurotypical people just do not have access to in a kind of medium that is like kind of a highly regulated academic writing. And I think like Stirner's actually quite like useful for that kind of problem, because Stirner also would say like it's not about like overthrowing this kind of discourse. That would be a revolutionary model. We're not trying to like get rid of it and replace it with a new thing. We're trying to find ways to subvert it from kind of within in this kind of like immanent critique model, and like find ways to like withdraw from it, this insurrectionary mode. And I found that playing with style a lot helped with trying to break out of this. But the problem is that like you also then still find yourself subject to other kinds of models of like what is good writing in different ways. If you choose to do one section in a different style, suddenly, okay, well, you're committing to doing it in that style, which has another set of expectations and everything. It's a very complicated problem to work around. So, but no, I mean, I definitely like agree that there's like it's a limiting kind of style, but I also think that there is this kind of internal way that we can subvert it for our own ends. So, does anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah, like it's interesting thinking about this in the context of Stirner's life, right? Because he publishes this book and then gets fired from his job, and that's like super common with all the young Hegelians, right? Like they would either, yeah, I mean, like their job prospects got worse because of the things they published, and then they published even more radical stuff because it's just getting worse and worse for them economically. I would say in terms of this instance and like in terms of writing professionally, I don't know what degree you can get out of that like within it. For instance, like Stirner, when he talks about some of the other like I think Brunebauer, for instance, or Feuerbach, he's like, oh, they wanted an insurrection of theology, but really it was just a theological insurrection. And what he's getting at is like it just immediately gets subsumed back into this whole system. And to me, I think, based on Stirner's writings and life, it would be a matter of finding ways of writing outside of that. So yeah, I mean, if you are planning on, I don't know, doing this, because this is like one of the few, or just academia in general, is one of the few areas where you can just write about ideas. And I mean, that part of it is neat, but then there's always this element of like, oh, it's just, to make profits for publishers and just the whole system. It's, to me, it seems like you find avenues outside of that in which you can freely express yourself. Yeah.
We are up on the time that I've listed that this is going to end on, but I want to give the other people on the panel a chance to respond, because we did kind of just open up this topic right very close to the end. So we won't take any new questions, but I will allow other responses.
I think there was one question in the chat that we missed earlier from
Was
Lilith,
there?
who's still here, who asks where
Oh,
does Stirner
right.
fall between Bauer's / Marx's all theology is zoology, and Feuerbach's and Engels all theology is anthropology.
Yeah. Does anyone want to
Well,
take a chance to respond to that?
oh yeah, well, I mean, well, I also like this question because my answer is very simple, but I'm also very interested in what you guys think of it, because what I read in Stirner is that he says all theology is psychology. And then what's more, modern politics is theology, which is the same psychological process. So I'm actually very curious what you guys think.
So, I mean, so across the axes of Bauer and Feuerbach, I mean, Stirner links Feuerbach and Bauer. He thinks that, as they were saying, that they're all just doing a theological insurrection. They're both doing anthropology insofar as, so whilst Bauer says that, under religion is the human self-consciousness, which we've only just discovered, Feuerbach thinks that underneath religion is the fact that we're already acting as if we're humanists, so we already treat each other nice as humans because there's God in us, but actually we're really acting the same way as if there was humans in us, humanness, capital H, capital M, man. And to that extent, that is going to be Stirner's intervening, particularly actually on the level of psychology, as you said, because the Dimensionleben, the Hegelian life is a attempt at doing a psychology, or at least using Hegelian psychology, at least rejecting the elements that make it a psychology, which is the account of habit. And by rejecting the account of habit, he wants to reject the idea that there is anything natural or good or dialectically necessary about our ways in which we habituate ourselves to the world in which we find ourselves. And this is true in Hegel as well, because Hegel does give an account of this lovely complete state, and everyone is, all the men in it are very habituated to their situation. But then, of course, Hegel also recognizes there's an excess that the system can't hold, and that's the Pöbel, the rabble. And this rabble is the people who can't have the material basis for a good life and a family and, a bourgeois middle class economic existence under the system he's talking about. And what is Hegel's solution to this? It's send them somewhere else. And this is actually interesting because when I was looking into Stirner's views on race, I was thinking, why doesn't Stirner talk about colonialism? It's happening at this time. It's not happening in Germany. But then I did look into German pro-colonial ideology in the 1840s. And it's very Hegelian in the sense, what I mean by that is that it treats colonialism as a problem to be solved in the sense of capitalism is destroying our way of life. We have this surplus of people that can't live a good German life under this system. We need to export them somewhere else, which is Hegel's exact solution to the problem of the people who can't live under this capitalist system or this proto-capitalist sort of transitionary system. And so we really do see this in Stirner as a kind of a critique of the excess that these systems produce. And I wonder, even going back to Ben's question, is that when we talk about Stirner reading his in these various ways, particularly in terms of speaking Stirner in terms of institutions, we can't go back to, for example, Stirner's text, The False Principles of Education. Because there's education which educates the will in order to make the will subservient to educational institutions, or the will is empowered by education. And Stirner is very much still an educator, mostly in the sense of you think education should serve man, not man serve education. Man in the species sense, of course. And the shift education you can actually track from his, because Mimaf did the translation of his first piece on school rules. And if you compare that to False Principle of Education, you can see the shift completely. The first text is very orthodox Hegelian. The second text is very much breaking with this. And if we talk about Stirner in the academy in this way, of course, there's also the question of why we're reading him. We're reading him for the sake of the academy, to enrich the academy. We are, being bad scenarians. Although, if Stirner thinks I mean, I don't mean Stirner to mean egoism, because we're always egoist according to Stirner. If we use him for ends that we value, then we're close to that mark. But although this has, of course, created various strands in history of Stirner studies. I mean, not to keep going about Larry Stepelevich, but the question of whether or not Stirner is a Hegelian is based on him. And Larry was a good friend to me, but his entire reading of Stirner was based on a profound hatred of Marx and Marxism. I mean, he was. I mean, his reading of the A Man's Life section once said that Stirner, he said that Stirnerians would they would have masters, but they wouldn't have the same mind as their masters. This is nonsense. I mean, that's absolutely can't quite capture the insurrectionary spirit of Stirner because it was so grounded in trying to shore him up against Marxism. And so this is part of the thing, the things we bring to Stirner insofar as we read him. And so overall, the history in which we read Stirner is definitely tied into this question of what are we being educated by Stirner for? If it is a matter of education level of what can or is evolving ourselves, and I think this reading education really has to sort of take a center stage here when it comes to what he means for us.
Good. Thank you for that extensive reply. Does anyone want to respond to the last question by Lilith? Or are we good to end the roundtable here? Okay, it's looking like that was the last one. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for your questions. And thank you to the other participants in the roundtable. I'm very happy with how this conference has gone. It was a lot less of a marathon than last year, having 10 presenters in one day was quite a bit, and we weren't able to get into everything that we should have. So I'm very glad we got the chance to break it up into these 2 days with all these excellent presentations. I'm happy with all of the panels, all the presenters. This roundtable was great. Yeah, and also thank you to the volunteer moderators, Jacob being one of them, and then also thank you to, they're not in attendance, but the 2 people that helped me put this on, Jude Callis and Kylie Vasquez. It made my life a lot easier doing PhD applications on top of this. So yeah, but I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here. And I can leave the room open for a little longer if people want to chat, but if not, I can just close it. So thank you.